Very well. We are at the full hour, so let's get started. So welcome to the Agile Strategy Meetup Group. My name is Morten, and my main role in this is to keep the time, which I will try to do. And really pleased today to have you here, Erik, to talk about basically two questions which I put at you. One is where do you see strategy going, and what is your advice to people who are new in the area of strategy? And the reason for the last question is in a way twofold. So one is that, in a sense, even if everybody knows and agrees that strategy is important in the Agile community, it has not been sort of front and center until now. And the second thing is that the way the world is going, there are something happening around strategy that might lead some of us to look more in that direction. Anything else you want to tell about yourself? Welcome to do so, and please take us away.
Yeah, thank you, Morten. Thank you for having me, and thank you for this initiative. It's really, really good, and agile strategy, connecting those two things, which fit very well together. So it's really good that you have this session, and I'm really honored to be invited. You know, some of my inspirational sources, like Dave Snowden is here, but you have Patrick Overstedt and some of my sparring partners, Carl Scotland and Marcus Andrzejczak. So I'm just honored and happy to be invited in this. So yeah, I'm looking forward to a nice session. I hope we can have some good discussions and some good debates during the coming 58 minutes. And I prepared a little slide. So let's see, slide deck. So let's see if I can get that up on the screen.
So just while you get started, Erik, let me emphasize that the session is recorded and we intend to release it after the session.
So I'm hoping that you can see my screen now. So yeah, strategy for sustainable success.
Not actually showing on my screen. I don't know how about everybody else.
Yeah, I see a long black stripe.
I see that as well. So if that's it, then we see it.
Well, let's see. Do you see something else now?
No.
Oh, that's weird. Let's see what I can do then.
Actually, we do see some icons from your screen.
Okay, so I probably took the wrong window.
Just see the top of your browser.
That's not what you're supposed to see. You're supposed to see a presentation within my browser. Let me see if I can do that. So I will start the browser again, like that. That's the one I want. Now I think it should be working. I just need to close a lot of windows there. No distractions.
Yeah, so it works now. We can see the forest.
Yeah, let's see the forest for the trees, but where is my browser? Can you see my browser now? Maybe there's some permission here that is going on, but this is weird. I mean,
no, we can see your browser now.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
So I will just mode, but we see the slide set.
Oh, so let's do like this and see if that works. Like that.
I'm a little nervous myself because this is my first experience with Zoom. I teamed through COVID, so it's only now I really get the full Zoom experience.
So, can you see some turbulent times on the screen?
Yes.
Good. Yeah, strategy, big word. I'm a practitioner, so just to warn you. So And I can tell you how I got into this thing called strategy some 25 years ago. So I was doing the first I was the head of the team doing the technical negotiations for the first 3G contract in the world, and this was in Japan, Tokyo, Japan. So I was head of the Ericsson technical negotiation team, and we were having meetings with the customer every week or more. And I was curious about I think Matti needs to mute. Thank you, Matti. Yes, so I wanted to know how our technical negotiations to win this first 3G contract would fit into the overall strategy of Ericsson as a company. So I asked my manager, and he said, well, I don't know. I need to check with my manager. So he came back the next day. I've checked with my manager, and he doesn't know either. So he will check with his manager. And that happened to be the manager of Ericsson in Japan, or the managing director of Ericsson Japan. So 3 days later, my manager came back, and he had this binder with 50 pages of strategy, and it was very secret. It said confidential on it, and I had to sign off that I had received the document. And yeah, it was pretty good, actually. I think it was done by McKinsey, but obviously they had talked to a lot of people who know this stuff. People who had done first generation of mobile telephony networks, second generation, GSM. They had talked to people in R&D. They had talked to people in sales. They had talked to people in marketing. They had talked to people in competitor companies. And it was a one-page summary of those 50 pages. There were no illustrations or nothing like that, but it was a pretty good pointer and starting point. And it even had something about the importance of winning the Japanese market for winning the whole 3G market. So then I could understand that how I and my team could contribute, and how we fitted into this overall context of strategy. And that's where it all started. A 50-page strategy document with an executive summary, and seeing how we could contribute some 25 years ago. So I'm a practitioner. I just wanted to start there. And I will share some experiences, some examples. And I also found some things during this 25-year journey, some patterns that I find really, really interesting. So speaking of Japan, some of you may have seen this. Do you know what it is? Who knows what this is?
It's Hokusai.
Yes, indeed. And a lot of people think this is a tsunami, but it's not. It's a freak wave. And people living in the Nordics may remember another freak wave, when waves collide, and some huge wave can make really disastrous things happen, not only in Hokusai's times, or we had this terrible incident or accident with almost 1,000 people died in the Baltics with Estonia, and that was a freak wave. So there's been those black swans or freak events all throughout history, and the world has been volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous for as long as there's been humans on this planet, but still we managed to survive and thrive. But this is a reminder that we can actually learn from Hokusai's times, 200 years ago. We can learn from China 2,500, 3,000 years ago, because they were living in turbulent times. They had wars, they had pandemics, they had social revolutions for several hundred years. So in one sense, it was 10x or 100x worse than what we're seeing today. So there are patterns, there are even potential principles that we can learn from history. And why strategy? Well, sustainable success in turbulent times. What's the difference from Hokusai's times or China, or it wasn't even China 2,500 years ago. They still were consolidating into an empire. But the difference now, we have bits flying around. We have information, and that's somewhat faster than atoms flying around. So things are speeding up a bit with the advent of things like the internet and mobile communication and all those things we've seen over the past 50 years, say. So things are changing and things move faster. So strategy is even more important when things go quickly, and there's another kind of strategy that is more more needed when things are moving at this breathtaking speed, and things will never be slower than they are today. They're moving at an increasingly faster pace. So my take on what strategy is two fundamental things. It's choices. You need to make choices and find you can call it harmonized, you can call it aligned, you can call it coherent, but you need to have a direction, and you need to make those one choice or a few choices of direction for yourself, for your team, for your organization, and you need to do it regularly. It's not a one-off thing. It's not a 5-year plan. So this is important. If your surroundings, if your context is moving quickly, you need to move quickly, because otherwise you're dead, but you don't really know it yet. So choices is one thing. Actions are equally important, and they need to be in a harmonized, coherent, or aligned direction. And ideally, they should be done by everyone, everywhere in the organization. So it's not just about the C-suite or the founder or the CEO making choices and then, telling people exactly what to do. It's about outlining a direction and getting all that energy, all that momentum of the people in the organization in the same direction. So that's my working definition of what strategy is, and we can talk more about that because there will be plenty of time for dialogue. So how would you do this? So I'm thinking let's dig into some advice from practitioners, some timeless patterns that seem to be reoccurring throughout history, 2,500 years back until today. So we have these three gentlemen, Sun Tzu from around 2,500 years ago, John Boyd. I mean, they're all practitioners, right? Sun Tzu, practitioner, general, if he existed. Let's say he existed, or there was a collective of generals in what is now called China that wrote down their patterns, their insights 2,500 years ago. John Boyd, big fan of Sun Tzu. I mean, he studied military history, and he found patterns that he found very, very applicable from Sun Tzu after checking out the Auftragstaktik from the German military, going back to Moltke in the 1870s. And he formulated what is called the ODA loop, the Observe, Orient, Decide, Act, which is not really a loop. It's basically well, today we would call it an image of a complex adaptive system, but that science wasn't really around when Boyd started thinking about this. And then we have Simon Wardley, who is very much inspired by both by Boyd and Sun Tzu, and his major contribution here would be to visualize strategy in something called Wardley maps. We'll talk more about that later. So they're building upon each other. They're standing on each other's shoulders, so standing on the shoulders of giants. And the foundation is around orientation. You need to know your current situation, your current context. That's where it all starts. And then we can pick out a few patterns. I mean, Sun Tzu talking about the successful organization is the one that can deliver both the expected and the positive surprise. Boyd, handling the quickest rate of change that makes you survive and thrive. And Simon Wardley, British gentleman, active right now, invented Wardley maps some 15 years ago, talking about the art of shaping an environment. And for those of you who listened in on Dave Snowden's session on Tuesday this week, this is pretty consistent with the modern advances in complex adaptive system, a la Dave. So, yeah, practitioners who thought about strategy deeply, had a number of patterns, and let's deep dive into a few of those patterns to start us off. Well, just to tell you a little bit about who I am, I forgot about that commercial break. So I'm Erik. I told you a little bit about my story in Ericsson. I've been leading organization of up to 400 people in R&D, global R&D, Sweden, Finland, Poland, Japan, China, and yeah, I've also a connection to the Agile community because I was one of the navigators of a 5, 6, 7 year journey transforming a 2,000 person product development unit in Ericsson a few years back. And I wrote this little book about the art of strategy. And yeah, I won't talk so much about that anymore. So let's get into Sun Tzu and the expected and the surprise. What's this? Anyone remembers? It's the iPhone, the first iPhone, right? It didn't even have an app store. It had apps. You see that at the top. It could make phone calls, it could send mails, it could browse the internet, and you had your iPod. So this was sort of expected, right? I mean, calling, mails, browsing, music, all those things existed before the first iPhone. Nokia had some cool smartphones. Ericsson had some cool smartphones. So this was sort of expected. What was totally unexpected was to have it in a single device and with a slick user interface that was truly awesome, right? So it just worked. That was expected. But you had it in one device and it was an awesome interface, the touch interface. And by doing that, you could, of course, create this huge following of users that were extremely delighted and extremely loyal to the Apple, not only the iPhone but the whole ecosystem. So I think this is a brilliant example of engaging with the expected and then coming with this wow positive surprise. So this is a pretty cool pattern, and we use that in Ericsson. We had biannual releases of our mobile telephony network software, and we of course we wanted expected cool things, but we always had at least one, well, most cases just one really wow thing in each of those biannual releases, so that we would positively surprise our customers and they would go to the next release and buy the next release. So I think this is a cool example of a pattern that is equally valid today as it was 2,500 years ago when Sun Tzu wrote down his experiences as a practitioner in another volatile, uncertain and complex and ambiguous environment. So moving on. So handling the quickest rate of change, or handling quick rate of change, that's important, because if the world is moving quickly, you need to be handled that better than your competitors. So an example of handling a quick rate of change, and this is from Ericsson from a few years back, and coming back to this, the importance of having feedback loops and learning loops. So this was about doing quarterly strategy retrospectives and strategy prospectives. So it was both, feedback and learning from previous quarter, but also looking ahead for the next quarter. So this was speeding up the learning loop and doing it quarterly. And it was basically a half-day exercise for a leadership team, managers who sat down together and scrutinized what they had learned over the past quarter. And it was basically 4 questions. What's our current situation? Any new insights? Should we revise our strategy? Should we revise our targets? Or how should we revise our targets? And this was a big step for a company like Ericsson at the time, because strategy was either 1 year thing or even more, or even longer than that. So doing it quarterly was, wow, can you do that? Can you talk about strategy every quarter? Well, maybe you need to. And I have another example, which is even quicker, and that's from Scania, the truck maker in Sweden, and they had something they called real-time management. So that's another learning loop, where you think of a daily stand-up in each and every development team in Scania, hardware teams, software teams. So they have a 15-minute stand-up, and after that 15-minute slot, they take the stuff they cannot solve themselves, and the manager of that team, or let's say it's the manager of the team, brings that to his or her management team. So you have first all the sort of developers, engineers, and then the next level you have the managers of those teams. And then they have a 15 minutes time slot where they talk about, okay, what's blocking us, what do we need to solve, and either they solve it in their management team quickly, based on the feedback they have from their developers, the development teams. And for the things they cannot solve, they pop it to the next level. And that's the managers of the managers in that management team. And then hopefully they can solve most of the issues in that 15-minute time slot. And if not, guess what? You're at the CTO. So after 4 time slots, 4 15-minute time slots, you can pop things in 60 minutes every day from the engineer to the CTO of the company. And maybe they don't talk about strategic issues, but I can assure you that everyone in Scania knows their direction and how they contribute to the overall strategy, and they can easily find those blockers and impediments and resolve them on the right level, or pop it to the CTO in 60 minutes every day. So that's pretty cool. That's real-time management. But it also shows that you need to adjust your cycles to the problems at hand. But I think it's a pretty cool example. Yeah, moving on. Simon Wardley, shaping an environment to gain a desirable outcome. I don't know how many of you have worked with Wardley maps, so this will be a quick introduction. So it's about visualizing the evolution of technology and business to help you make the right choices to shape an environment and succeed together with your stakeholders. So typical questions, who are our customers? What do they need? Where's our market position? Where's competition today, tomorrow? Where's technology today, tomorrow? Where do we focus? What moves do we make? Should we do this in-house? Should we buy off the shelf, or should we outsource? Typical strategic questions, right? But additionally, what capabilities do we need? What do we have? How do we work? What's our ways of working today or tomorrow? And how do we organize ourselves today and tomorrow? So this is pretty powerful and beautiful, and visualizations is always a good thing, right? It makes it more easy to harmonize and get this orientation, because everyone sees the same picture, and if you can draw the picture together, it's even better. So let's try this out. So here you have 2 axes. You have the evolution axis, the horizontal axis, and you have a value chain axis. That's the vertical axis, from things that are invisible to users to things that are very visible to users. And the evolution, that's from something totally new, that's Genesis, all the way to a commodity, electricity or tap water. And in this case, it's from online gaming, and you have a user, and he or she has a gaming PC or a Mac possibly a VR headset or a console, and you have some content. That's the game. I mean, you have to have a new game, some game that you've never seen before. Because if you build the same game, no one will buy it, because that's the nature of gaming, right? You don't want to play the same game or a copy of a good game that you like. And you see the dependencies here between the components, how they relate to each other. So content is dependent on that you have a device to play it on, basically. And you need some kind of distribution network, you need a content distribution network, you need a gaming engine, you need a gaming platform, you need content APIs, dev tools, identity management, compute, data center, all the way down to power. And power is very much a commodity. A new game with that content is brand new. And then you have something which is custom built, some products that you can buy. And the cool thing with these Wardley map is that you can see here with the red arrows that the gaming engine is going towards commodity. Your gaming platform is going towards commodity. Your content APIs, your dev tools, everything is going towards commodity. It's just a matter of how quickly will that happen. And this will help you to decide, okay, how much of this should we do ourselves? Should we do a gaming engine? Maybe not. In this case, the company that has been, using this Wardley map, they have chosen to focus here. They will do the distribution network. They will do a console. They will do a VR headset. They won't do the games. They won't do Mac or PCs. So they have evaluated their position in this evolving market where technology is going, all technologies are going from being brand new to commodity. It's just a matter of how long time it takes. Mobile telephony was brand new in the, 70s, and now that is a commodity, I would say. So that has taken us some 50 years. Yeah. Wardley mapping. We can talk a lot about that, but just to give you a flavor for those of you who haven't seen it before, it's really, really cool stuff. Here's another kind of Wardley map. It's a dependency graph. We don't have the evolution axis, but this is my attempt at summarizing the patterns or the important capabilities that you need for strategy, for a successful strategy. And it's in the form of a Wardley map or a dependency graph with stakeholders at the top, their needs, and the various capabilities. And the capabilities are related to each other. So the capabilities at the bottom are more fundamental. So in order to successfully do strategy, you need to be able to observe somehow, gathering the data and facts. You need to form your orientation, a common understanding through regular visual assessments. And then you need to look at your purpose, call it purpose, intent, mission. You need to look at your leadership capabilities, your climatic patterns, how are things evolving in your context. You need to look at your business landscape, and you need to look at your doctrine, your ways of working, your principles. You need to be able to co-create your purpose based on your orientation. You need to be able to shape and choose, make those choices of conditions or constraints. And this is what we call strategy development. Then you need to make strategy happen. All those actions that I talked about in the beginning, harmonizing the understanding of the purpose, your decisions, and your orientation, and then giving people the autonomy to act, trust people to act. And, this is really distributed decision making with quick feedback loops, because depending on how swiftly your context is moving, your orientation cycle needs to be more quick than your competitors. That's the most important thing. And all these things will give us the momentum, the ability to move with surprise, speed, and flexibility. And that's the connection, of course, to Agile, because Agile is about flexibility, right? It's being able to adjust gracefully to changing conditions. And that will give you sustainable success in turbulent times. And I think I'll stop here because it's much more fun if we have a bit of a conversation than me just talking. So, yeah, thank you. Time for Q&A or debate or dialogue or conversation.
So reallocating a bit of more time budget for you, Erik. Just one question, not to let you off the hook. Any advice for people who are new in the field? And I'm especially thinking that the whole agile field is a bit under the weather and a laughing stock to some. So I think there's a number of people just orientating themselves to what's next. So if what comes up on their radar is strategy, how would you advise the typical agile coach to go in this direction? I mean, how do you start? How do you make yourself relevant in the company?
Well, that's a very good question. I think you start off by being curious. Start off by what is the strategy of the company? How do we work with strategy? You need to be curious around that. And if you're an agile coach or an organizational coach, a lot of the things that I've been talking about will be very, very natural because this way of doing strategy is much more fluid, much more adaptable, much more learning cycles, feedback cycle, which is typically what we learn through the agile movement, and some of the people in the agile movement had the background. They knew John Boyd's OODA loop cycle very, very well. So this was part of the agile movement from the very beginning. It's just applying it to another type of questions. So it's not only the operational things for a team or a team of teams, but how do we get these feedback cycles and learning cycles on every level of the company? So I would recommend using the leverage and the learning that you have as an agile coach or an organizational coach, and then sort of applying that also in a strategy kind of discussions. Being mindful, of course, that the higher up the hierarchy you get, the more people are sort of stuck in their ways. They might think they know about how to do strategy, and they've been doing it for 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years. So try to understand what their needs are and their problems and their challenges, and start small. So I think Johan had a question or a comment.
Yeah, thanks, Erik, for the presentation. I know you're into patterns and reuse of patterns, but if you go to the orderly mapping, there's some kind of novelty and it becomes commodity, but it needs, how do you apply reuse of patterns in that? Because of every 1,000 novelties, only a couple of them will become some kind of product or success. So I guess you need to reuse your patterns in order to take down the risk of the novelty, I guess.
Yeah, I think there are two kinds of patterns. So primarily when I talk about patterns, it's more about the patterns of strategy. I mean, things like think about the expected and the surprise. That is a pattern of strategy that you can reuse in different contexts. Those kind of eternal patterns of strategy could even be a foundation for like the first principles of strategy. Boyd wouldn't like talk of principles, because as soon as you start talking about principles and doctrine, you might be stuck and you cannot change your principles and change your ways. So patterns to me are a bit more fluid, but that doesn't stop us from learning from the patterns. So I'm primarily thinking of patterns of strategy. This thing about expected surprise, for instance, this thing about being able to cycle quickly, this thing about orientation. Those things are eternal patterns, timeless patterns that, I mean, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's so many good things from 2,500 years ago, and this recurs with John Boyd, it recurs with Moltke, it recurs with Nelson, it recurs with Simon Wardley. So we're sort of standing on the shoulders of giants, and we're rediscovering these patterns of strategy. But to your question, when it comes to a product, that's a totally different ball game, I would say. And then, yeah, then it's can you reuse patterns from different contexts and recombine them? Yeah, sure. You should always be open to it and be curious about it and bring in different perspectives, because that gives you a better orientation. And the more patterns you know from different contexts, the easier you will have to build new things. I mean, Boyd talked about building snowmobiles in the desert by combining things from different domains. You know, pick the water skis from the ocean, and pick the engine from somewhere, and pick the handlebars from a bicycle, and then suddenly you can build a snowmobile that can run even in the desert. So that's one way of thinking, of recombining patterns and picking up patterns from different domains. So maybe that's the first stab at your question.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. Just a bit cautious about the survival shift bias. You see, okay, it's just a success, but there's a huge amount of unsuccessful novelty there as well. So, but thank you for the answer, Erik.
Yeah, survivorship bias is always something to be aware of. That's a pattern. So I think Nigel had his hand up.
Thanks, Erik. So firstly, a confession. This is my first call, new to this group. Hello, everyone. Sorry I was late. My son was playing a football match. And I'm not necessarily from a massively agile background. I've done a little bit here and there. My background's more lean, Hoshin planning. I've done a lot of that in the last 5 to 10 years to much success. And I have a lot of questions. I suspect they'll only be answered if I read the book. So I'm going to try and scale them down. There's 3 that immediately jump out to me as a person curious and interested in how I might apply mapping in my role. The first is, I don't see in this model any form of goal or aspiration. So a lot of what I talk about is, strategy being a negotiation with your future state of self, right? And in any negotiation, expectation impacts outcome. So that not just the what we're going to do, our direction, how we're going to do it, but that anchor of expectation, i.e. what's our expected future performance in space. I don't see that in the model. Is that deliberate? That's question 1. Question 2 is, I'm interested in how a single map might capture the strategy of a business once it's cascaded throughout the business. So if you're familiar with Hoshin, you'd have different levels of X matrices as you cascade through the business. And is it similar where you'd replicate the map to a similar structure, or would you try and do it all in one thing? And then the third thing that I'm interested in, because I've been experimenting in a psychological model for adaptability recently. So I'm interested in if there's any work on mapping the interrelationships between, what is in effect, I suppose, a complex system model, which I'm maybe looking at here for strategy, with more of an internal psychological model and the interdependencies between the two. So 3 questions there. Sorry, everyone else, if I'm hogging the questions. You don't have to answer them all. I will shut up now, and if I need to, I'll buy the book. So thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. I mean, they're all very good questions. Let me start with the first one. I think when it comes to needs, goals, purpose, if you would ask Simon Wardley, when it comes to Wardley mapping, I mean, you need to start with your stakeholders. You need to start with their needs, and that's at the top of the map. And then you work your way downwards. I mean, what capabilities do we need in order to fulfill the needs of our stakeholders, or, for example, our customers? So it's super important that you do have a need, and you start from there. Otherwise, it won't work. It's very much outside in.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is goals are a component of the purpose section.
Well, so I'm realizing that this in this simplified version of a Wardley map, where we don't have the evolution axis, so then we have the need up here. We have stakeholders, societies, organizations, teams, individuals, customers, competitors. Why would they use strategy? Well, they want to be sustainably successful in turbulent times. That's their need. And in this case, all the capabilities here below the need are needed to fulfill that need. So you really need to start at the top and consider what capabilities you need. And then in this case, we're framing it around strategy. Why would you need strategy for a society, for an organization, for a team, an individual? But then further below here, you see the thing called purpose, and that you could call intent, you could call it winning aspiration or winning proposition. That is something you need in your strategy work. So it's sort of how should I put it? It's fractal in a sense. You need it. You need to co-create your purpose or your need or your intent based on this orientation, which is based on your observations. So you need to have these capabilities, let's say in your team or your organization, in order to successfully use strategy. And to your second question, will it be a single map or will it be recursive or fractal? Well, it really depends. You should start off with your customers and your needs, going outside in, and then you take it to the level of detail that you need. And if you can choose to zoom in to a component or a capability and make that much more detailed as you see fit. But I think you should start on a pretty high level at the beginning, and then you can go into each and every component. Let's say in this example, what about alignments? Okay, how do we unpack this? What's hidden in this capability? What do we need for us to be able to say that? Well, we can make sure that we harmonize the understanding. What's included there? So you can dig deeper into each and every capability or component in a worldly map. And to your final question regarding psychological connections, I don't really know. I mean, there's this thing about flow. Shikali the Hungarian guy. But well, maybe actually we have the work done by Carl Friston with the free energy principle and active inference, which is sort of how do you minimize surprise and how do you learn new things quickly. That's sort of a model of brain activity, and it's sort of related to psychology, and I think it's related to things like the observe, orient, decide, act loop as well. But that's a start to answer your question.
So would the question better be, if I'm listening to what you say, it sounds like, would my question better be phrased in terms of in line with this model? What are the psychological efforts that can make people desire being surprised? So I don't want to. I'll shut up in a minute. Sorry, I'm trying to. In my head, there's a psychological model that if you make the future for people more desirable, then they will hunt their future more actively, and there's less resistance to receiving future. But I don't know if that's so. I don't know if anyone in the community is thinking about that, and I'm wondering about how we might visualize that in a powerful way. And I think what I'm hearing here is, how do you create a pull to be surprised? I suppose is one of the things maybe I'm hearing.
Yeah, and also a loop where you take in different perspectives in order to update your orientation of the world, and you do that loop fairly regularly and quickly, and that will help you. So that's one way of thinking about it, and also you can. I mean, I have that as an example, and you will have the material afterwards, and you can look into that detail. There's a very cool map from a group that we're looking at all the blockers for why aren't we successful in doing strategy work? And then you can map out the components and you can see what blocks you from being successful. So that's another way of going about it. I mean, looking at the negative space and see, okay, how can we remove those blockers? What can we do there? I don't know if Marcus Andrzejak had a question before Mike has a question, or did Marcus take down his hand, or maybe he left.
Marcus is shaking his head. So
Okay.
go on, Mike.
Well, first I'll just comment to Nigel. Nigel, you might, rather than looking at it as a psychological construct, you might look at it as the neuroscience involved in change. Thinking is cognitively demanding, particularly when you get, into your 30s, and to be able to appreciate and to examine and take into consideration something novel, unique, or something that's oppositional to what you believe. It's metabolically demanding. It requires a tremendous amount of energy. So human beings, as part of the physical world, that's they're constrained by some of the physical, some of physics. So to conserve energy, it's easier to reject something that's unique or novel. So it's not necessarily a psychological profile, but it's much more of a neurological. It's about energy. How much energy does it take to move somebody, particularly if they're having to consider something that's in opposition to what they believe. You might look into something called the Semmelweis effect. That's why leaders tend to be the most rigid in some of these things. And the other thing, a comment I had for Erik or Morten is your definition of strategy is a little bit different than mine. So I define it as it's something people say that they do, or something that people say they create once they're promoted into a position where they have no idea of what they're supposed to be doing or what value they add. So I'm a little bit, I'm having to kind of translate your definition of strategy in a in a very different way.
Yeah, I mean,
Because the reason why I say that, Erik, is because every time somebody talks about strategy, they pull out iPhones and they talk about it's almost like it's just a rehashing of the good to great fallacy, where we pick on a couple of things and in retrospect we look at it and we say, oh, this is great strategy, when oftentimes what they're doing is no different than any number of thousands of companies that tried something similar but failed. So there's a huge component of luck involved in strategy too, successful strategy. And we don't talk about that.
No, definitely, and it is an art, and that's why I call the book "The Art of Strategy." And it's not a science, it's not engineering, it's non-deterministic, right? So the way I think about it is, if we have these capabilities listed here, it will make it easier for us to come up with those brilliant moves. I mean, having a little bit of a pattern library, having the capabilities listed here, then you can do your own expected and surprise moves, so to speak, whatever that means for you in your context. I think that's what I've seen as a practitioner over these 25 years in startups and in scale-ups and in big companies like Ericsson. That if you don't have these capabilities and you start off with strategy as planning, you will go tremendously wrong, and that's where most companies start. They do these SWOT analysis without any direction. They write down the bucket lists or laundry lists of things that pops out of people's heads, and then they really don't have the capabilities here, and the pattern of the practitioners here, the Sun Tzu patterns, the John Boyd patterns, the Simon Wardley patterns are a good source of inspiration, I feel, and it resonates with my experiences, both the good and bad and the ugly, over 25 years. Both as a subject of strategy being put to or put onto or forced down my throat, and also co-creating it. I don't know if that rambling answers your questions, but so Marcus, you're back, and you're muted.
Like on that last point, I think what we all have to consider is that, you know, also these strategies things are just models in hindsight. So even though Uda is brilliant, it's a model. It doesn't guarantee success. As you said, it's like the outcome is non-deterministic. It is patterns of behavior, if you want, which might help your luck a little. Like, you know, all of these successes which you just talked about, which, you know, are in everybody's mouth, like the iPhone, like all of these great examples are always the end point of a lot of non-successes following the same patterns. So I think the fun and art part of strategy is like giving a direction, being open to all these experiments on that way without knowing what's actually happening, and that giving up control is rather the art than thinking that you can determine the outcome of whatever your company is doing. And this interplay between giving direction, but not actually knowing what the outcome will be, and leaving that space and the leeway, I think is what is also hard. And I think also in the sense of what was said before, that metabolic hard stuff, because like all the models we know about innovation, even if you know them, it's easy to rationally understand them, but it's emotionally totally hard to be in them, because it's kind of coming to the halting problem. Because before you have a hockey stick, like the hockey stick starts with down, and when you're in the down, in the valley, you don't know when the valley ends. And that, I think, is actually the hard tension, all that strategy work, that you never can guarantee a thing while you're mostly living in an environment which is sort of, well, you know, Erik, as a CEO, what can you promise me? And you can't. And it's that tension that's drawing on you, that you're in a position where everybody expects that strong leader that can guarantee something, but you actually, knowing the strategy game, know that you cannot promise anything of that. And I think that is also a metabolical toll in the end that's coming up. And I think that this is like the most straining part of all this strategy work, knowing that it's non-deterministic, but playing a deterministic game to the outside. I think.
That's a very, very good point, Marcus. Thank you for emphasizing that. I mean, and I think that's why orientation, that capability, is so important, that you do the regular assessments, or whatever you call them, and your regular observation, using the observation and getting new insights, seeing new patterns, matching with what you knew before, having different perspective, diversity of perspectives in the room when you do this orientation, and that you do it regularly, or as regularly as you think you need it. That's the way to handle the uncertainty.
And like, you know, the last sentence I want to say is like, I always say like that really good strategists are a little bit hypocrites in a way that they provide clarity without knowing, and provide a certain element of certainty also to the environment, although they know it's a totally uncertain game they're playing. And I think all of the tools help us to deal with that psychologically.
Very true. So Nigel, you have your hand up, please.
Yeah, thanks. I suppose the question I'm reflecting on is OODA Loop's, you know, big fan, and just the examples of Sun Tzu, you know, etc. Do you see any? It's a very poorly worded question, but there's something for me about the planning horizons where OODA Loops being used and the goals that they link to. So, you know, whether it's a pilot in a plane, or someone preparing for war, or, you know, when does an OODA loop stop becoming strategic? I suppose is something I'm just reflecting on. When is it, you know, what makes a strategic application of OODA loops versus just, I suppose, you know, tactically? Does that make?
I think I'm getting where you're going. So for me, the OODA loop is, I mean, it's not a loop. It's a model how a brain work or how several brains work together, and that you can apply on pretty much anything. You can apply it on yourself, on your daily work, all the way up to grand strategy, for NATO. So for me, it's sort of the feedback and learning, implicit and explicit in the OODA loop, can be applied on different levels. That's the simple answer. I don't know if that makes sense for you.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you.
Steve, please.
Thanks. An observation. I really like the patterns thing. Looking for, and I really like the principles idea as things that always, let's say, can positively influence strategy. I came into strategy via the McKinsey deck, which you said at the start, right? So basically, I got my first clients 20 years ago from people who'd been landed with the McKinsey deck and then had to make sense out of them, like what is going on with this? How the hell, you know? So I got into strategy through that route. Well, let's say corporate strategy through that route. But then I was also a diplomatic speechwriter, and this was between the Middle East and Europe during 9/11. So there's a whole different school of strategy there. And then I worked in strategy with more recently with Google. And what I see is, I mean, Mintzberg said it when he talks about the design, the planning, the positioning, schools of strategy and what have you. And they even go back to Sun Tzu. But what I think is really, if one understands the context, so for me, Agile, and I've worked with many Agile teams, it's more about technical leadership from a product perspective. And that's a whole different breed of strategy to which these principles still will apply than corporate strategy, which is about whether you talk Martin Reeves, Roger Martin, Ionescu and the clockwork stuff, like they've all got these different forms of strategy that are, let's say, most applicable to a specific context of a business or group of people at any one time. And I think that's, for me, is like just trying to make sense of the different ways we all think about it. I think the Sun Tzu, the Wardley, stuff like this are just great contributors to. Very often a startup or a scale-up will actually work from a purpose, and then it will sort of evolve and grow into strategy over time, because these words don't really mean anything much. They just give a general sense of direction. And try asking 3 people what your mission is, you'll get 3 completely different answers. So I always work within that fuzziness with strategy and narrative. Just an observation. So I like the idea of focusing on patterns. I think it's great.
Thank you for that, Steve.
We're approaching our landing zone time. So I'd like us to finish with style before the top of the hour. So Erik, anything else you want to do with us, or some question you want to ask us before we hang up?
No, not really. I mean, you will have the deck. I saw some questions around that in the chat, and there are some additional slides there. There's the collection of 150 something Wardley maps that can serve as source of inspiration. I mean, they're from different domains, so that can give you more patterns, more examples to add to your little toolbox of tricks. So yeah, happy for the conversation. Thank you all for great questions, and yeah, I don't have anything more than that. I'm looking forward to the coming sessions with Patrick and Marcus and Carl and the others. So yeah, thank you very much for the initiative again, Morten.
And presenting. Thank you. So everyone, at least in the European time zone, have a very nice evening, and thanks a lot for joining, and hope to see you all soon again. So, bye-bye. Thank you, Erik.
Thank you.